Welcome to DBC. Today we are talking about The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari, a fable about fulfilling your dreams and reaching your destiny by Robin Sharma. We're going to talk a little bit about what the book does, the key insights of the book, and then at the end, point number 3 will be to speak of how the book operates on sort of a meta level, which I think is the biggest insight. If you ever would like to convince someone of something that you think that they might have trouble letting go of, this is the key. So step 1, what is the story? The story is about two characters, Julian and John. So Julian Mantle is this 53-year-old, high-paid, high-shot defense attorney who lives the crazy life with, going out with models all the time and eating at the fanciest restaurants and living life to excess and going to trial and being really good in court. So one day in court, in the middle of a packed courtroom, Julian falls over and has a heart attack, a massive heart attack on the floor. He's rushed to the hospital, and his firm discovers that Julian decided to quit practicing law, sell all of his things, including his prized red Ferrari, and head to India. So he has no further contact with anyone at his firm, and he just takes off. They're just left to wonder what happened to their superstar. The book begins actually 3 years after Julian's heart attack. At the end of a very long day, we're introduced to the next character, John, and his assistant informs him that a visitor has just arrived to see him. So with John's consent, because he thinks, call security, but maybe this guy really needs some help. I don't know, just let him in, whatever. So with John's permission, a man enters his room, and the man is described as a smiling, tall, lean, and muscular man in his mid-30s walked into the office, and he's radiating this energy and this good vibes, right? So the stranger reveals himself, surprise, as Julian Mantle. And over the rest of the book, Julian spends time having a conversation with John. And it turns out that Julian has spent the past 3 years living in Kashmir, which is like a disputed area in the very north of India, and it lies between Pakistan and China, and it's the western end of the Himalayan mountain range. So Julian lets John know that he's spent this time living with the great sages of Sivana, are these men and women that he met while he was wandering around one day in the Himalayas, and he came across one of the members of this group of sages, and he ends up going to their village in the middle of the mountains and living with them and learning their wisdom, their techniques, and their knowledge for the last 3 years. But before they started him, they said, hey, part of the condition of you living with us is that when you're done here, you have to go home and share this wisdom and these knowledge and these rituals with the people of your homeland. So the rest of the book goes through, there are 7 chapters after this part that go through the 7 key insights that Julian picked up in his time in India. So the first is being a master of one's own mind and the control you can have over your own mind. Number 2 is living a life of purpose. The purpose of life is to live a life of purpose. 3 is practicing constant self-improvement, which they use the Japanese word kaizen. Living with discipline, respecting one's time, living in service of others, and then embracing and being constantly amazed by the present moment and whatever's unfolding and not projecting the future or back into the past. There's a lot of really good insights in the book, and it's all very accessible. It's very grounded. There's not a lot of weird words, and when they are, they're explained. So one note is that as of the recording of this video, it's 2017, and this book was written in 1997. So this book is 20 years old now, and a lot of the ideas of embracing the present, living a life of purpose, and being a master of your own thoughts, this stuff seems trite in 2017 to a lot of people. And so 1997, this is the same year that Eckhart Tolle wrote The Power of Now, and 10 years before Tim Ferriss wrote his first book. And the reason I bring up Tim Ferriss is because at one point, Julian's talking about one of his teachers, and he taught him the, quote, ancient rule of 20, unquote, which is an allusion to, if you've read Tim Ferriss's work, he brings up the Pareto principle, which is the 80-20 rule is what it's also called. The idea that Pareto, this Italian geneticist, realized that his pea plants, 20% of the crops yielded 80% of the peas. And this, the 80-20 rule, this applies to, let's say in business, usually 80% of the sales revenue comes from 20% of the salespeople, or 80% of the people in jail come from 20% of the population, or whatever the case may be. So I would like to give Sharma some credit for I came across this book 20 years after it was written, and so that we don't just think, oh, there's another book coming out in 2017, 18, 19 about this Eastern spiritual stuff. And I am curious if he's totally innocent of imposing like Western values onto Indians or people in the East. However, that said, I think there's still a lot. I mean, given that if you're watching this, you're probably in the West somewhere, and that's where I was born and raised and formed. So I think there are a lot of really good things to take from this. I'd recommend reading through the rituals and the mantras and affirmations. But I think the biggest insight from this book is the answer to this question. So what does this book, The Monk Who Sold Ferrari, have to do with this book, which is Michael Crichton's State of Fear, which is a very controversial novel. It was written 7 years after The Monk in 2004. And for those of you who haven't read it or haven't heard of it, it's a much bigger book, and it is essentially about denying climate change. And I'm going to leave that issue off the screen way over there somewhere, because that's not the point of the book. The point of this video, sorry. As I was reading this book, I said, these two books are actually the same book. The structure is exactly the same. Crichton's book goes into more detail because it's obviously a lot bigger. It probably has a word count like 3 to 4 times The Monk. But the idea here, the same, is like, what does Sharma do in this book? And this is point 3 of the video here, where if he comes up, what if you want to get someone to let go of an idea they've held on to for too long, that's holding them back? So this is what you do: is you tell a story, or in Sharma's words, a fable. Number 1, you have a character who has already undertaken a huge life change. And you have character number 2, who is a character with whom character number 1 shares his insights and his experience. And so in this case, Julian is the character who already had the change made in his life and is sort of on the other side of the wall on his path. And John is the second character. So character number 2 in the author's world is always a stand-in for the reader. And Sharma or Michael Crichton, they walk the reader through the inner process in the head and the heart of letting go and processing change via a series of questions back and forth between character 1 and character 2. And I don't know if it's a coincidence or not, but the character number 2, which is like the protagonist, the stand-in for the reader, in both of these books is a lawyer. I'm not sure if that's just a coincidence or if there's something there. There's kind of there's a almost Platonic feel to, if you've read any of Plato's work, to the back and forth and how the questions are asked. It's very, very particular. So you can walk the audience, the skeptical reader, through their own doubts and their own mental processes of accepting new ideas. So I don't usually read in these things, but I wanted to read a few examples just so you can see what I'm speaking about. So Julian and John are talking about the idea of how you can control your mind and positive thoughts versus negative thoughts and what replacing those do. So Julian says to John, the sages would actually make themselves laugh, whether they felt like it or not, just to get the, quote, happiness juices, unquote, flowing early in the morning. Anyways, Julian, so John responds, Julian, I'm trying very hard to keep my cup empty, which this is an image that the two of them have used for John's process in the book. Right, so I'm trying to keep my cup empty, but I think that you will agree I've done a very good job for a novice, but that sounds odd, even for a band of monks living high in the Himalayas. So this is an objection that the reader might have. Who are these dudes in the Himalayas? I live in Burbank, California, and there's smog and traffic, and what does that have to do with me? So Julian responds, but it's not. Take a guess how many times the average 4-year-old laughs in a day. John replies, who knows? Julian says, I do, 300. Now guess how many times the average adult laughs in our society every day. John responds, 50. Julian, of course not. No, try 15. You see my point? Laughing is medicine for the soul, even if you don't feel like it. Okay, so then they continue. So you see the objection that a potential reader could have, and the author resolves it through a back and forth of the two characters in the book. One more, when they're talking about living a life of service to others is being crucial and having meaning and purpose and a fulfilled life, they speak. Okay, so Julian's talking. When you take care to practice random acts of kindness daily, John, your own life becomes far richer and more meaningful. To cultivate the sacredness and sanctity of each day, serve others in some way, every day. So John replies, are you suggesting that I get involved in some volunteer work? So again, a suggestion by the author through a character for the reader. That's an excellent starting point, says Julian. But what I'm speaking of is much more philosophical than that. I'm suggesting you adopt a new paradigm for your role on the planet. Paradigm. Well, it's even italicized, right? So John replies, "You're losing me again. Shed some light on the term paradigm. I'm not familiar with it." And then Julian lets him know, paradigm is a simple way of looking at circumstances or your life and the world in general. So the biggest point takeaway from me, there's a lot of really good things in here to write down and to practice every day, getting up early and self-discipline and all this, very good. And then the meta point is how to convince someone of something that they're probably hesitant to accept is you write a story about two other people that may or may not even exist, and you use those two characters as an author to walk your reader through their own doubts in their heart and in their head about changing and accepting something new. Thanks for watching DBC. Hope you enjoyed that, and please check out The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari.